She thought losing the baby was the worst thing that could happen. Then she realized her husband hadn't even noticed she was grieving, because he was too busy consoling her. Not Briar, not his wife, not the woman who had just walked out of a hospital with empty arms and a broken heart. Her, Celestina Voss, the woman Leandro Martelli had loved before the Empire, before the vows, before any of it. Briar Ashmont Martelli sat in the back of a black car, alone, a white discharge paper folded in her lap, and watched the rain drag itself down the window like it, too, had somewhere else it would rather be. The driver, one of Leandro's men, hadn't said a single word the entire ride. She hadn't asked him to. There was nothing left to say that the silence wasn't already saying louder. She was 31 years old. She had survived things most women never face. She had married into one of the most powerful Italian-American crime families on the eastern seaboard, kept her composure at dinners where the wrong word got men killed, and smiled through rooms full of people who saw her as decoration. She had done all of it, with grace. And still, she had lost the baby on a Tuesday. Leandro had been called away on business that same morning. By the time she'd been rushed to the hospital, his phone had rung 4 times and gone to voicemail twice. The 5th call, he'd picked up, listened, said, "I'll be there." He wasn't there. What arrived instead, 3 hours later, was a text message. "Handling something urgent. How are you feeling?" How was she feeling? Briar had stared at those 4 words until they blurred, until they stopped looking like concern and started looking like what they actually were. An obligation. A box checked, a husband doing the minimum so he could return to whatever, whoever, had been more urgent than his wife in a hospital bed. She already knew who it was. She'd known for weeks, maybe longer, if she was honest with herself in the way she'd been avoiding. Celestina had come back into their lives like smoke, quietly, gradually, and then all at once, choking everything. She was Leandro's past, his first love, the woman he'd walked away from to build his empire, or so the story went. What Briar had come to understand, slowly and then devastatingly, was that Leandro had never truly walked away. He had simply paused. And now Celestina was living on the 3rd floor of their estate. Their estate. Yet under the pretense of protection, some threat, some danger, some reason Leandro had explained with such calm certainty that Briar had almost believed it. Almost. Now hello, sweet friends. Welcome back. If you're new here, oh honey, you picked the right day to show up. Come on in and get comfortable, because this one is going to stay with you. Drop a comment below and tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? I absolutely love hearing from you all, and if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that button right now. We are building something special here, and you do not want to miss a single chapter. Back to Briar, because here is what nobody tells you about grief. It doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like a woman sitting upright at a kitchen table at 6 a.m., drinking cold coffee, doing the math on her own life, counting the moments, retracing the steps, asking herself the one question she'd been too afraid to ask out loud. When exactly did I become invisible to the man I married? She didn't have the answer yet, but she was getting close. And when Briar Ashmont finally found it, that answer, it wouldn't break her. It would free her. The most dangerous illusion a powerful man can carry is the belief that loyalty from a good woman is unconditional, no matter how badly he treats her. Briar Ashmont had not grown up soft. She was raised in Covington, Kentucky, a river town with good bones and hard winters, by a mother who worked double shifts at a textile plant and a grandfather who believed that a woman's spine was her most important feature, not her looks, not her charm. Her spine. "You bend, Briar girl," her grandfather used to say, rocking on the back porch with his evening coffee. "But you don't break. You hear me? There's a difference. Bending means you're still standing." She had carried those words like a compass her entire life. She was the kind of woman who noticed everything and said half of it. Sharp without being cold. Beautiful without being vain. She had put herself through college on scholarships and stubbornness, earned a degree in architectural design, and built a quiet but respected career before Leandro Martelli had walked into a fundraiser gala in Manhattan and looked at her like she was the only still thing in a spinning room. She hadn't wanted to fall for him. She'd known, instinctively, the way smart women always know, that a man like Leandro came with weight. History. A room she wouldn't be allowed into and questions she wasn't supposed to ask. But he had been relentless in the most tender way, patient, deliberate. He'd shown up at her office with coffee one morning, just to say hello. He'd remembered 6 weeks later an offhand comment she'd made about a cathedral in Savannah she'd always wanted to see, and had driven her there on a Sunday without announcement. That was Leandro at his best, attentive in a way that felt like being chosen. What Briar hadn't known then, what she understood now with a clarity that felt like swallowing glass, was that his attentiveness was real. But it was also selective. It turned on like a spotlight when he wanted something, and dimmed just as completely when something else caught his eye. Leandro Martelli was 40 years old, and the second son of Enzo Martelli, a man whose name had once made judges nervous and politicians careful. He had taken over the family's operation at 32, after his older brother Raphael disappeared under circumstances that were never spoken about in full sentences. He was not a cruel man by nature. That was the complicated part. He was capable of genuine warmth, fierce loyalty to the people he deemed worth protecting, and a kind of old-world tenderness that surfaced in unexpected moments. He cooked Sunday gravy from scratch. He called his mother every morning at 8. He had once shut down an entire business deal because the contractor had spoken disrespectfully to a cleaning woman in the hallway. He had goodness in him, real goodness. But goodness in a flawed man is not the same as righteousness. And in Leandro's flaw, the one he'd never examined, the one no one had ever loved him hard enough to name, was this. He compartmentalized the people he loved. He didn't see it as neglect, he saw it as management. Briar was his wife, his present, his home, his future. Celestina was his past. Unresolved, yes, but contained. Separate. He genuinely believed he could keep both truths in different rooms of himself and never let the walls collapse. He was wrong. Celestina Voss was 41, half Italian, half Austrian, and the kind of beautiful that aged into something sharper and more dangerous with every passing year. She and Leandro had been together for nearly 5 years in their 20s, volatile, passionate, consuming. She had left him when the family business became something she claimed she couldn't live inside. She had walked away clean, or so Leandro had told Briar. What Leandro had never mentioned, what Briar had only recently begun to piece together through whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, was that Celestina hadn't simply left. She had been sent away. By Enzo, Leandro's father. For reasons that, even now, lived only in the oldest memories of the Martelli household staff. And she had come back now, older, composed, and carrying something in her eyes that Briar recognized immediately. Unfinished business. Briar knew all of this the way a woman knows things she hasn't been told directly, through the body, through the temperature of a room when two people are pretending not to look at each other, through the way her husband's voice changed, just slightly, just enough, when he spoke Celestina's name. She had told herself it was imagination. She had told herself it was pregnancy hormones, stress, insecurity. She had told herself a lot of things. The hospital had made it very hard to keep telling herself anything at all. Moral reminder. When a woman starts making excuses for the man who's hurting her, it's not weakness. It's love running out of places to go. But love was never meant to be a cage. And here's what nobody on the outside ever saw about Briar Ashmont. beneath the composure, beneath the grace, beneath the quiet dignity she wore like a second skin, she was furious. Not the hot, loud kind of fury that makes a scene. The cold, still kind. The kind that waits. She had been waiting a long time. And somewhere between that hospital discharge paper and the sound of Leandro's voice down the hall, soft, concerned, a tender, speaking to Celestina about her comfort while his wife sat alone in the dark, Briar Ashmont stopped waiting. The moment a woman sees the truth she's been protecting herself from, that is not her destruction. That is her awakening. It was a Thursday night when the last wall came down. Briar hadn't been looking for anything. That was the part that would stay with her longest. She hadn't gone searching. She hadn't followed anyone or listened at doors or done any of the desperate, humiliating things a suspicious wife does when she's unraveling. She had simply gone downstairs for a glass of water at 11:30 because grief had made sleep impossible, and her throat was dry from crying she hadn't let herself do in front of anyone. That was all. Just water, just a quiet kitchen, just a woman trying to get through one more night. She was 4 steps from the bottom of the staircase when she heard it. Leandro's voice, low and private, the way it only got when he thought no one could hear him. Coming from the sitting room off the east corridor, the one with the tall windows and the old fireplace he'd had restored the year they got married because Briar had once said she loved the smell of a real wood fire. She stopped. Not because she intended to listen, because her body stopped before her mind gave it permission. You don't have to keep pretending everything is fine, Sella. Sella. The nickname landed like a stone dropped into still water. I'm not pretending, Celestina's voice, smooth, unhurried, carefully calibrated. I'm managing. There's a difference. You don't have to manage around me. A pause. As the soft sound of movement. You never did. Briar's hand found the wall beside her. Leandro, I know the situation. I'm not saying anything I shouldn't. His voice dropped lower. I just need you to know that you being here, it matters. Whatever else is happening, it matters to me. Silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty. Briar walked back upstairs. She didn't run. She didn't make a sound. She placed each foot with the deliberate care of a woman who understands that the moment she makes noise, she loses something she can't get back. Her dignity, her advantage, or both. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. She sat there for a long time. Here is what she did not do. She did not scream. She did not confront. She did not call her mother or throw anything or demand an explanation. Because Briar Ashmont had been raised by a man who taught her that reaction is surrender, and the truth had just handed her something far more valuable than a fight. It had handed her clarity. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach, the habit of 7 months that her body hadn't unlearned yet, and felt the absence there like a second heartbeat. Hollow, constant, hers alone to carry. Leandro had not asked about her body since the hospital, not once. He had not asked what the doctors said, or whether she was in pain, or whether she needed anything in the quiet, physical way that loss leaves a woman needing things she doesn't know how to name. He had asked, "How are you feeling?" in a text message, and considered it done. Meanwhile, downstairs, he was telling another woman that her presence mattered. Briar exhaled slowly. Something in her chest that had been clenched for months, maybe years, quietly let go. Not in a soft way, in the way a rope snaps when it's been pulled past its limit. Not a release. A severance. The next morning, she called her college roommate, Odette Farnwell, a family attorney based in Philadelphia, who Leandro had always found a little too sharp for his comfort. Briar had always considered that a point in Odette's favor. I need to know my options, Briar said, standing at the window of the guest bathroom with the faucet running so no one could hear. Quietly. Nothing moves until I say so. But I need to know. Odette didn't ask unnecessary questions. That was why Briar had called her. Give me 48 hours, Odette said. "And Briar, don't sign anything, don't move any of your personal accounts, and don't let him know you're thinking. Can you do that?" Briar looked at her own reflection in the mirror. Tired eyes, steady jaw, her grandfather's posture. "Honey," she said quietly, "I've been doing that for months." She went down to breakfast 20 minutes later, set the table, poured coffee, smiled at Leandro when he walked in, still buttoning his cuff. He kissed her on the cheek the way men kiss furniture. Automatic, contactless, already moving towards something else. She handed him his cup. And behind those calm, steady eyes, Briar Ashmont had already begun to leave. Leandro noticed on the fourth day. Not the grief. He'd been successfully avoiding that. What he noticed was the quiet. Not Briar's usual quiet. The composed, graceful stillness he had always mistaken for contentment. This was different. And this quiet had edges. It didn't invite him in. It didn't wait for him. It simply existed, complete, self-contained, like a room that had been locked from the inside. She was polite at dinner, asked appropriate questions, laughed softly at something his underboss Rocco Del Fiore said when he came by Wednesday evening. She was, by every visible measure, perfectly fine, and it unnerved him in a way he couldn't name and refused to examine. "You seem better," he said that Wednesday night, loosening his tie at the bedroom mirror. Briar looked up from her book. "Do I?" "Yeah." He watched her in the reflection. "More like yourself." She smiled, small, unreadable. "Good night, Leandro." She turned the lamp off on her side. He stood there in the half-dark for a moment longer than he should have. What Leandro didn't know was that Odette had already sent Briar a 40-page document. She had read every word. Twice. Sitting in her car in the parking structure of a Whole Foods 3 miles from the estate, because it was the one place she was certain no one was watching. Leandro's security team monitored the house. They monitored her phone. She'd suspected it for over a year. What they did not monitor was a prepaid cell Odette had overnighted inside a hollow book with a note that read, "Use this. Burn nothing yet. Just read." Briar read. What she found was not entirely surprising, but it was thorough, and thorough had a weight that suspicion never quite managed. The Martelli estate, the accounts she had nominal access to, the properties in her name that weren't entirely in her name. A prenuptial agreement she had signed at 29, in love and trusting, that had been written with the kind of careful precision that protected exactly one person in the marriage. And it wasn't her. She photographed every page, sent them to Odette. Then she sat in that parking structure for 10 minutes, watching ordinary people load ordinary groceries into ordinary cars, and let herself feel the full weight of how thoroughly she had been an afterthought in her own marriage. 10 minutes. That was all she allowed. Then she drove home, walked through the front door, and hung up her coat like nothing had happened. Celestina made her move on a Friday. It wasn't dramatic. That was almost worse. She simply appeared in the kitchen at 7 in the morning. Briar's kitchen, Briar's space, had the one room in the estate Briar had designed herself down to the tile grout, wearing one of Leandro's old Columbia sweatshirts and asking the housekeeper where the good coffee was kept. Like she lived there, like it was already hers. The housekeeper, sweet, nervous Petra, had glanced at Briar with barely concealed panic. Briar had set down her mug calmly, crossed the kitchen, opened the cabinet herself, handed Celestina the coffee without a word, with a smile so composed it could have been cut from stone. "Thank you, Briar," Celestina said, smooth, watching her. "Of course," Briar replied, and walked out. She heard Celestina exhale behind her, not relief, frustration, because Celestina had wanted a reaction. She had wanted tears or ice or something she could take back to Leandro as evidence that Briar was unstable, difficult, had too consumed by grief to be a proper wife. She got nothing. And nothing, Briar had learned, was the one thing a woman like Celestina couldn't weaponize. But here is where it shifted. That same Friday afternoon, while Leandro was in a closed-door meeting with his inner circle, Briar had a visitor of her own. Filomena Martelli, Leandro's mother. 73 years old, silver-haired, sharp as a letter opener, and one of the few people in the Martelli world who had always looked at Briar like she was a person rather than a position. She arrived unannounced, the way she always did, sat at the kitchen table, accepted tea, and then looked at Briar with those dark, weathered eyes and said without preamble, "She was sent away the first time because she was working for someone who wanted to bring this family down. My husband found out. Leandro never knew." Briar set the kettle down very carefully. "And now?" she asked. Filomena wrapped both hands around her cup. "Now I'm an old woman who made the mistake of staying quiet once before," she said. "And I am not going to make it again." Briar sat down across from Filomena, and for the first time since the hospital, she didn't feel alone. The truth doesn't need your permission to exist. It only needs one brave person willing to finally say it out loud. Filomena didn't rush. That was the thing about women who had lived long enough inside dangerous households. They had learned that the most important words deserved space. She wrapped both hands around her teacup, looked out the kitchen window at the gray April garden, and began the way women of her generation always began the hardest stories, yet from the beginning. Celestina Voss had come into Leandro's life at 26, bright, magnetic, fluent in 4 languages, and the particular dialect of charm that made powerful men feel understood. Leandro had been 29, freshly elevated within the family, burning with ambition and hungry for something that felt like his. He had fallen completely. What no one had told him, what Enzo Martelli had discovered through a contact inside a federal task force, was that Celestina's entry into their world had not been accidental. She had been placed, not by a rival family. Worse, by a financial crimes investigator named Whitmore, who had spent 6 years building a case against the Martelli organization and needed someone on the inside who could access Leandro's personal documents, his account structures, his inner circle's names and movements. Celestina had been that someone. Whether she had genuinely fallen for Leandro somewhere along the way, Filomena paused here, mouth tightening, was a question that had never been answered cleanly. But what was documented, what Enzo had held in his own hands, was correspondence between Celestina and Whitmore spanning 14 months of her relationship with Leandro. Enzo had sent her away quietly. No violence. He wasn't that kind of man with women. But firmly, completely, with the kind of message that was meant to be permanent. She had stayed away for over a decade. "Then Whitmore died 2 years ago," Filomena said, setting her cup down. "Heart attack. His entire case, everything he'd built, got buried in a federal archive, and 6 months after that, she came back," Briar said. Filomena nodded once. "With a story about being in danger, needing protection." And Leandro believed her. The older woman's eyes were sad in a way that had nothing to do with surprise. "He wanted to. There's a difference." Briar sat with that for a long moment. She was not a woman who made decisions in the heat of feeling. She turned the information over carefully, the way her grandfather had taught her to turn a problem, looking at every face of it before she committed to a direction. Here was what she now understood. Celestina was not simply a ghost from Leandro's past. She was a woman who had once been willing to dismantle his entire world for professional gain, who had disappeared when the risk became too high, and who had returned, conveniently, and strategically, the moment the threat of exposure died with the man who'd employed her. She wasn't in danger. She was the danger. And Leandro, brilliant in so many rooms, was completely blind in this one, because the blindness wasn't ignorance. It was want. He wanted the version of Celestina he had loved at 29. He was protecting a memory wearing a woman's face. "Does he know any of this?" Briar asked. "He knows what his father told him, which was nothing." Filomena folded her hands. "Enzo thought he was protecting him, He thought if Leandro never knew the real reason, it would hurt less. It didn't protect him, Breyer said quietly. It just left him with an open wound he never knew to close. Philomena looked at her with something close to grief. No, it didn't. That evening, Breyer made 2 moves. At the first, she contacted Odette and had her quietly request a copy of Whitmore's archive case files through a civil discovery attorney they knew in Washington. It would take time, but it would come. The second move was simpler, more immediate. She walked into Leandro's study at 9 o'clock while he was still at his desk, and she sat down across from him without being invited. He looked up, faintly surprised. She hadn't initiated a private conversation in weeks. "I want to talk about Celestina," she said. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Breyer." "I'm not asking you to choose," she said calmly. "I'm not crying. I'm not threatening. I am asking you one question, and I need you to answer it honestly." She held his gaze without flinching. "Do you know why your father really sent her away?" The silence that followed was long enough to be its own answer. "He said it was a security concern," Leandro said carefully. "That's what he said," Breyer agreed. "But do you know what the concern actually was?" He said nothing. She stood up, smoothed the front of her blouse. "I think you should find out," she said, "before you spend any more of yourself protecting a woman you don't actually know." She walked out and left him sitting in the silence she'd built. "Oh, this story is just getting started, honey. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. And drop a love in the comments if you felt that last scene. Because Breyer just made her first real move. Leandro didn't sleep that night. Breyer knew because she didn't either. And the house had a particular quality of stillness when it was holding 2 people awake in separate silences. She lay on her side of the bed, listening to the absence of his breathing evening out, and somewhere around 2 in the morning, she heard him leave the room. Heard the study door close down the hall. Heard nothing after that for a very long time. He was digging. She had known he would. Whatever his failures as a husband, Leandro Martelli was not a man who could let an unanswered question sit. His need to know, to control the information in any room he occupied, was as instinctive as breathing. She had handed him a loose thread and trusted his nature to do the rest. What she hadn't fully prepared for was what would happen when he found the end of it. By Saturday morning, the atmosphere in the house had changed in a way that everyone felt and no one acknowledged. Leandro came to breakfast looking like a man who had been somewhere very cold for a long time. He sat down, drank his coffee, did not speak. His eyes moved to Celestina when she entered the kitchen. And for the first time since her arrival, Breyer watched something shift in that gaze. Something that had been warm became, not cold exactly, but measuring. Celestina felt it immediately. Breyer could see it in the microsecond adjustment of her posture, the way her smile arrived half a beat late. She looked at Breyer. Breyer looked back pleasantly and reached for the orange juice. The desperate move came that afternoon. Breyer was in the upstairs library when she heard raised voices below, not screaming, but the pressurized kind of conversation that has been stripped of all its courtesy. She didn't move toward it. She simply sat, book open in her lap, and waited. 20 minutes later, Leandro appeared in the library doorway. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face was working very hard. "She's leaving," he said. Breyer turned a page. "All right." "Breyer?" His voice had something in it she hadn't heard in months. Raw. Unmanaged. "I didn't know. About my father. About what she—" "I know you didn't," she said simply. "That doesn't—" He stopped, pressed 2 fingers to his forehead. "That doesn't fix anything." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." He crossed the room and sat down heavily in the chair across from her. Not beside her, she noticed. Across. like a man who understood he had not yet earned the right to be closer. "Oh, tell me what you need," he said. And that was when Briar's carefully constructed composure finally showed its fracture line. Not because he'd said the wrong thing. Because he'd said it 4 months too late. Because she had needed him to say those exact words in a hospital room while she lay alone counting ceiling tiles, and instead she had gotten a text message. "How are you feeling?" She closed the book. "Do you know what I needed, Leandro?" Her voice was quiet, absolutely steady. "The night I lost our baby, do you know what I actually needed?" He said nothing. His jaw was tight. His eyes, and this was the part that nearly broke her, his eyes were wet. "I needed you to show up," she said. "That was it. That was the whole thing. I didn't need a speech or an explanation or a grand gesture. Yet I needed my husband to walk through a hospital door and sit next to me and be there." She paused. "You weren't there. I know. And every day since then," she continued, "I have watched you be there for her, consistently, without being asked, every single day." The silence that followed was the most honest thing that had existed between them in months. "I'm sorry," he said. And he meant it. She could hear that he meant it. But sorry, she had learned, was not the same as changed. And changed was not the same as safe. And safe was the only currency she had left any interest in collecting. She stood up, walked to the window. Outside, she could see one of Leandro's men loading Celestina's luggage into a black car at the far end of the drive. Celestina herself stood beside it, composed, unhurried. And then, and as if sensing eyes on her, looked up, directly at Briar's window. Briar didn't step back. She held the woman's gaze for 3 full seconds, then turned away, not in defeat, in disinterest, the most devastating thing she could have offered. That evening, Briar called Odette. "I'm ready," she said. "Are you sure?" She thought about the hospital, the text message, the sitting room at 11:30, the kitchen on a Friday morning, the 14 months of correspondence between a woman and a federal investigator, her grandfather's voice. "You bend, Briar girl, but you don't break." "File it," she said. "File everything." Real change in a person doesn't announce itself with words. It shows up quietly, consistently, in the smallest moments. And a wise woman knows the difference between a performance and a transformation. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning. Odette had them hand-delivered by a courier at 9:45, while Leandro was in the middle of a call with his financial team. Briar had timed it that way deliberately, not out of cruelty, but because she had learned, after everything, that the most important things deserved to be received without an audience to perform for. His assistant brought them to him without knowing what they were. Leandro knew the moment he saw Odette Farnwell's firm name on the envelope. He sat with them unopened on his desk for 2 hours. His financial team finished their call. Rocco came and went. The house moved around him in its ordinary rhythms while he sat perfectly still, and the envelope in front of him, and did something Briar had rarely seen him do in 4 years of marriage. He did nothing. No calls, no strategy, no immediate countermove. He simply sat with the weight of what he had brought upon himself and, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, did not try to manage his way out of the feeling. He found her in the garden at noon. She was deadheading the rose bushes along the south wall, something she did when she needed to think with her hands. She heard him coming and didn't turn around. He stopped a few feet behind her and stood there long enough that she knew he was choosing his words with unusual care. "I'm not going to fight the filing," he said. She paused, kept her hands on the stems. "But I'm asking you, not as your husband, not as a Martelli, just as the man who has spent 2 hours sitting at his desk understanding exactly how badly he failed you, I'm asking you for 30 days. She turned then, looked at him. He was not performing. That was the thing she checked for first. The polished Leandro, the one who knew how to arrange his face into whatever the moment required. That man wasn't standing in her garden. This one looked tired in a way that went past sleep. Undone in a way that was genuine. 30 days for what? She asked. To show you something real, he said. Not words, not sorry. Something real. Leandro. I called my mother this morning, he said. She told me everything. Not just about Celestina. Everything. About what my father built and what it cost the people inside it. About what I've been doing to you without calling it what it was. His voice didn't break, but it came close. I have been a selfish man, Briar. I dressed it up in protection and provision and told myself that was enough. It wasn't. It was nowhere near enough. She looked at him for a long time. The garden was very quiet. A bird somewhere in the hedge. The distant sound of traffic beyond the estate walls. The ordinary world continuing regardless. What happened to Celestina, she said, wasn't just about her. You know that, right? The problem was never only her. I know, he said. She was the symptom. I was the disease. That was the unexpected thing. Not that he asked, not that he apologized, but that he named it. Precisely, correctly, without being coached. Named his own failure in the exact terms that Briar had spent months privately rolling around in her chest like a stone she couldn't put down. It didn't fix anything. She was clear-eyed enough to know that. But it cracked something open in her that pure anger had sealed shut. She pulled off her gardening gloves, folded them over the low wall. 30 days, she said. Not for the marriage, for the truth. I want to see who you actually are when you're not hiding behind the empire, or the history, or the idea of yourself. She held his gaze. Can you do that? Something moved across his face. Relief, yes, but underneath it something more fragile. Gratitude that hadn't been earned yet and knew it. Yes, he said. Then we start today, she said. And Leandro... She picked up her basket. The first thing I need you to do is come with me to the hospital. There's a grief counselor I've been seeing alone for 3 weeks. I'd like you to come to the next session. He nodded without hesitation. I'll drive, he said quietly. It was not a romantic moment. There were no declarations, no embraces, no cinematic rush of reunion. It was simply two people standing in a garden agreeing, carefully, cautiously, to try something they had never actually tried before. Honesty. Full, uncomfortable, unglamorous honesty. For Briar, it wasn't hope yet. It was something smaller and more durable than hope. It was the decision to find out. A man who has truly changed doesn't need to be pushed to choose right. He chooses right before anyone asks, because he finally understands what he almost lost. The 30 days were not easy, and nobody who has ever tried to rebuild something honest from the rubble of something false would tell you it was easy. There were sessions with the grief counselor, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Aurélie Fontaine, that left both of them wrung out and silent on the drive home. There were evenings where Leandro sat across from Briar at the dinner table and tried to have a real conversation, and discovered, with visible discomfort, how unpracticed he was at it. How much of their marriage had been surface. How much he had filled with the noise of his world instead of the quiet work of actually knowing his wife. He learned things about her in those 30 days that 4 years of marriage had never taught him. That she sketched building facades in the margins of notebooks when she was thinking. That she had wanted to design a community library in Covington as a tribute to her grandfather, and had quietly abandoned the idea when the demands of being a Martelli wife consumed the hours she'd have needed. That the night she lost the baby, the thing she had cried hardest about, alone in a hospital bathroom, was not the loss itself but the realization that she had no one to call who would come without conditions. That last one put something permanent and painful in Leandro's eyes the night she told him. He didn't try to defend himself. He just said, "Tell me about him, your grandfather." And she did. For the first time in their marriage, she talked for an hour straight, and he listened without checking his phone once. The federal files arrived on day 19, and Odette delivered them personally, drove up from Philadelphia on a Thursday morning and sat at the kitchen table with Briar and, at Briar's quiet insistence, Leandro. They were thorough. 14 months of correspondence. Detailed, specific. Names, dates, account numbers that Celestina had passed to Whitmore. Information that, had the case proceeded, would have dismantled not just the Martelli business operation but implicated men who were now legitimate, grandfathers, community figures. Leandro read every page without speaking. When he finished, he closed the file, pressed both hands flat on the table, stared at the middle distance for a long moment. "She came back," he said finally, "because the only man who knew the truth was dead." "Yes," Odette said. She wasn't in danger." "No. She came back to see what was still available to her." His voice was not angry. It was something quieter and more devastating. The sound of a man watching an illusion he'd carried for 15 years dissolve completely. "And I let her in. Nobody said anything." He looked at Briar. "I let her into your home." "Yes," Briar said, simply, without cruelty. He nodded once, the slow nod of a man accepting a verdict he has no defense against. "What do you need me to do?" he asked Odette. "The files go to a federal contact I trust," Odette said. "Quietly. It won't be a spectacle, but it will be permanent. Celestina will not be in a position to approach this family again." "Do it," he said. No hesitation, no negotiation, no protective instinct firing in the direction of a woman he had finally, completely, seen clearly. Celestina made her last move on day 24. A handwritten letter delivered to the estate addressed to Leandro. Not Briar, not the household. Leandro. Personal. Intimate in tone. It spoke of their history, their connection, the life they could have had. The life that was perhaps still possible if he was brave enough to choose it. It was beautifully written, calculated down to the last comma. Leandro read it once. Then he walked to the fireplace in the sitting room, the one with the restored hearth he'd had done for Briar, and burned it. He didn't tell Briar he'd done this. She found out 3 days later from Petra, the housekeeper who had seen it happen. That was the moment. Not the grand gesture, not the speech, not the counseling sessions or the federal files or the 30 days of deliberate presence. It was the quiet thing he'd done when no one was watching, when there was no audience to perform goodness for. He had chosen right when it cost him something real, in an empty room, with no one to see it. Briar stood in the kitchen when Petra told her, and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Safe. On day 30, she walked into his study. Set Odette's folder, the divorce filing, on his desk. He looked up. She sat down across from him. Same chair, same desk. Different everything else. "I'm withdrawing the filing," she said. He didn't exhale with relief. He didn't reach for her. He held her gaze with the steadiness of a man who understood this was not a finish line. It was a beginning, and beginnings required more from him than endings ever had. "What do you need from me going forward?" he asked. Oh, she thought about her grandfather, about spine, about bending but not breaking. "I need a partner," she said. "Not a provider, not a protector, a partner. Someone who shows up, in hospitals, in grief, in ordinary Tuesdays. Someone who sees me first." "I can be that," he said. "I know you can," she replied. "The question was always whether you would." "I will," he said. "Starting the day you lost the baby. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel that alone again. A woman who survives the worst season of her marriage and chooses, with open eyes and a full understanding of the cost, to rebuild, is not naive. She is the bravest kind of person there is. Spring came to the Martelli estate the way it always did. Quietly at first, then all at once. The rose bushes along the south wall filled back in, and the garden Briar had neglected through the hardest months began to look like itself again. She noticed it one morning from the kitchen window, the way the light was sitting differently on the hedgerow, softer and more golden, and felt something move through her chest that she hadn't felt in so long it took her a moment to name it. Peace. Not the hollow, performed kind she had worn through those terrible months, like a coat 2 sizes too large. The real kind, the kind that has been earned through fire and sits in the body differently, heavier, warmer, more permanent. She poured her coffee and stood at that window for a long time, just breathing. The Covington Community Library broke ground on a warm Saturday in early May. Briar had designed it herself, every line, every corner, every detail, and a single-story building with tall windows that let the river light in from the south, reading alcoves built into the walls like small embraces, and a carved wooden dedication above the entrance that read, "For men and women whose spines held when everything else bent." Her grandfather's words, set in oak, permanent. Leandro had funded it without being asked, not as penance, not as a grand romantic gesture, but because she had told him about it on one of those early counseling session evenings, and he had listened and remembered and acted, the way a partner does, quietly, practically, without needing credit for it. He stood beside her at the groundbreaking with a hard hat slightly too large for his head and the look of a man who was exactly where he wanted to be. She had laughed at the hard hat, a real laugh, the unguarded kind that surprised them both. And he had looked at her like she'd handed him something precious. He was collecting those moments now. She could see it in him, the deliberate attention, the way he stored the small things. It was new behavior from an old man, which made it more meaningful, not less. Dr. Fontaine had told them, in one of their final sessions, that grief shared between 2 people either drives them apart permanently or builds a foundation that nothing else can replicate. There is no way to know which it will be, she'd said, until you decide together to find out. They had found out. The baby, their daughter, they had quietly decided, though the hospital had not confirmed it, was named in a small private ceremony that only Philomena attended. They called her Rosanna, after Leandro's grandmother. Yet they planted a rose bush in the garden for her, the deep red one along the south wall that bloomed first every spring. Briar tended it herself. Philomena came to Sunday dinner every week now, a new tradition that had started in the early weeks of rebuilding and simply never stopped. She sat at the head of the table and told stories about the old country with the theatrical relish of a woman who had been waiting decades for an audience patient enough to appreciate them. Leandro refilled her wine without being asked. Briar asked follow-up questions that made the old woman light up like a lamp. It was ordinary. Wonderfully, extraordinarily ordinary. Briar had not known, until she'd nearly lost it, how much she had wanted ordinary. One evening in late June, Leandro found her in the library, her favorite room, at the one she'd claimed fully as hers during the hard months and never entirely surrendered. She was sketching, new plans, something large, something ambitious. He leaned in the doorway without interrupting and watched her work for a moment. "Another library?" he asked. "A community center," she said, not looking up. "Rames. Then maybe 2 more after that." He was quiet for a beat. "You're going to need a proper studio." "I know. I converted the east room last week," he said. "North-facing windows. Better light. The drafting table arrives Thursday." She looked up then. He wasn't performing. He wasn't waiting for praise. He was already turning back toward the hallway. Dinner in 20. Because that was who he was becoming. A man who did the quiet, right thing and kept moving. Not because someone was watching, but because he had finally understood that love was not a feeling you declared. It was a practice you showed up for, every day, in the small, undramatic, irreplaceable moments. "Leandro?" she called after him. He turned. She looked at him, this complicated, flawed, genuinely trying man, and felt the full, clear weight of her own choice. Not the choice she'd been pushed into. Not the choice fear or grief or loneliness had made for her. The one she'd made with open eyes, a full understanding of the cost, and her grandfather's spine holding her upright. "Thank you," she said. He smiled, the rare, unguarded kind. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "The drafting table was expensive." She laughed, and the house, which had held so much silence and sorrow and secrets, filled with the sound of it. As closing moral lesson. The end of a woman's patience is not the end of her story. Sometimes it is the very first page of the life she was always meant to live, and the person she was always meant to become. Briar Ashmont had not grown up soft, but she had grown up whole. And whole, she had learned, was the only thing worth being. And that, sweet friends, is the story of Briar Ashmont, a woman who bent but never broke. If this story moved you, touched you, or reminded you of your own strength, please leave a comment below and tell me. I read every single word you write. Share this with someone who needs it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, oh honey, what are you waiting for? Hit that button, ring that bell, and I will see you in the next story. Because the next one, it's going to be even better. I promise you that. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, your story is never over until it ends well.